3, 4, 5.
Good work.
Okay, thank you. So,
Yeah, we even got a few steps in.
Senator Brock, I don't mean to pry, but what was your final decision?
Coffee or pee? There's the question.
All right, Brock for Senate or Brock for governor or lieutenant governor. Okay, so we're going to move on to S10. Let me just briefly set the stage. I apologize because I feel like this is like the 6th time I've done this. This bill is, I think, a 1-sentence bill as it stands right now, extending the sunset date from March 31st to, you recall, the kind of convoluted that it would be 2 months after the last completed quarter, subsequent to the lifting of the executive order for administrative convenience for the department. And what it's extending the sunset on is, and Damien's still with us, I hope, yep. Basically, the ability for people to get benefits when they quit for COVID-related reasons, and to have there be no chargeability to the businesses or their experience rating. Chargeability is the wrong word, affecting their experience rating. And for businesses that lay off people, similarly for COVID-related reasons, there would be no impact on their experience rating. That is the S10 in its simplistic form. We would extend that out for the substantive provisions there for several weeks and months until we're well beyond the pandemic, or beyond
Well,
the emergency order.
Yeah, we clarified that it would be in the quarter that we would, remember we did that whole piece about it.
That's what I was talking about. That's what I was talking about, the convoluted. We'll just stop right there for Damien to explain the new sunset date as asked for by the department. Damien, are you with us?
I am. Sorry, it's just taking a second to get my cursor over the unmute button. So yeah, the way the new sunset date works is it is the last day of the calendar quarter, or is the first day of the calendar quarter following the calendar quarter in which the pandemic state of emergency is lifted, unless it's within, I believe, the last 30 days of that calendar quarter, and then it's the calendar quarter after that. So basically, we'll take Q2 of this year. If the state of emergency is lifted at the beginning of May, then the sunset date would be July 1. If the state of emergency is lifted on the 15th of June, so in the last 30 days of the quarter, the sunset date would be October 1. Sorry, I have to Q3. It's always a tough one for me. So
subject to correction by anybody on the committee or clarification, the one substantive issue that we've been debating back and forth deals with the issue of offering a job back to a person who's been either laid off or who has quit. The draft that is online from 10 days ago, I believe, structures it in the following fashion. You recall that last year's law only required an offer of rehire to, and this is not an absolute requirement that you offer to rehire, but if you fail to offer to rehire, it could affect your experience rating for that individual employee and your potential future contribution rate. It only applied to layoffs. And that was the bill that we passed last year. If you recall, way back when, the administrators administration came in and said, it's going to be a real nightmare. We've been so busy with other things. We're going to have to go through 180,000 claims or some significant number in 2020 as they're in the process right now of setting up experience ratings based upon last year. And can we be relieved of checking for that and give universal non-experience rating to employers who have laid off people and eliminate the check of whether they offered them to rehire. I came back, I think several other members of the committee said, yes, we understand that problem, but that's not the same problem going forward. And at the very least, we're going to continue that for layoffs in 2021. And we'd like for you to do that for people who voluntarily quit their jobs as well. There was some discussion back and forth that may present inequitable situations in some circumstances. So we said, okay, if we apply it to voluntary quits as well, there could be a good cause exception for employers that have not made that offer. And we started getting caught up in the weeds of examples there. And we said, we'll let the department decide what good cause is. Just get us, spend the next month or so, get us some guidelines of what you say and bring them back to us. The legislative process would work its way if we felt they overstepped their bounds and effectively made a good cause into a universal exception. So we're trying to pair people back with their job where it's reasonably to do so, and using the experience rating as a small incentive to do that with a good cause exception. I don't know that I need to say more. If there are questions about that, clarifications on that, where I'd like to go with this is to know whether, and it's be a straw vote, we can pull up, do you want to pull up the language on this, Damien, and show it to the committee?
Sure, I can
And
do
this,
that.
my understanding, is the only issue we haven't really fully heard people's feelings on it. I think we have heard some, but I think all the rest of it of extending the sunset, I haven't heard any objection to.
Sure. Let's see. There we go. Sorry, it just took me a second to find the draft in the folder. It's opening now.
Do we have the draft on our system where we can look at the entirety of it?
You should, yeah.
Where would it be in?
Yeah, that's a good question.
It should have been posted for the committee before we left. Let me just double check that. It is.
And while he's doing that, Senator Brock, I assume you understand we're not looking at the whole draft right now because there's a big part of it that we're going to have to discuss, but this is just one issue.
Yep. So last. I actually don't see it posted, so I'm going to send it out to the committee at the moment, just to make sure we get it back there, and I'll put it up on the screen in just a second here. One thing to note is these are just possible amendments that have been discussed. So it's listed as rough draft of possible S10 amendments. And so it should be just treated as such. So a lot of these are things that we're discussing, and not all of it may have been edited. So I'm sending it right now, and I'll pull up the amendment on my screen. Oops. There we go. Okay. All right. So we are okay, so we're in the 2021 relief from COVID-19 related benefit charges. So the section that Senator Sirotkin has been talking about is this section 1A here that I've just highlighted with my cursor. The individual voluntarily separated from employment with the employer for one of the reasons set forth in the statute, which are all of the good cause reasons. The individual is sick, the individual is caring for someone who's sick, the individual is quarantining or caring for someone who has a health condition that means they have to stay home, the individual has a health condition, or the individual needs to provide childcare for a child who's out of school or whose daycare is closed. Then the other one is what we provided. B, C, and D are the three that we provided. We provided sort of automatic, well, are proposing to provide automatic relief for 2020, but had originally required a rehire. And so those are the layoffs from the employer for different reasons. And then getting into 2, this is the rehire requirement. So the employer rehired or offered to rehire the employee within a reasonable time, not to exceed 30 days after the reason for the individual's separation from employment no longer exists. So these are either the employer layoff reason no longer exists, so the employer no longer has to cease operation because of COVID-19, or the employee's voluntary quit reason no longer exists. And that's the issue that Senator Sirotkin is talking about. So in this case, the child care has reopened and the child is able to go back to the child care. So this is option A, is the employer has to rehire or at least offer to rehire the employee within a reasonable time not to exceed 30 days after that reason no longer exists. Or option 2 here is that the employer has to demonstrate to the satisfaction of the commissioner that it had good cause for failing to rehire or offer to rehire the employee within the time period. So the determination of good cause is left to the commissioner in this case. But good cause that we've discussed are instances like the employee voluntarily quit. They worked in a key job for the employer, so the employer had to hire someone else to fill that position, and now does not have a position available for that individual because they've been gone for 6 months or 8 months. Or the employer downsized. So, they closed the location where the individual worked. They lost a contract and don't have the shift that the individual used to work on. So the position's not available for some reason like that. And I'm sure there are other examples that we could come up with. Those are the 2 that we've sort of discussed regularly.
Can I ask a clarifying question before we go on?
Yep.
So this is going back one section, just so I'm clear, what we are talking about with the experience rating, we're terming rate relief, not a rate freeze. The rate freeze is not currently in the bill. So there's a distinction between rate relief related to COVID, separations from work, and a rate freeze that is being proposed but not currently here.
So we're dealing with 2 different things here. The rate relief, I think, is safer to think of that as the department's proposal to keep the taxable wage base frozen and keep us at a lower tax schedule. So hold down the tax schedule, hold down the taxable wage base. that provides actual rate relief. This is experience rating relief. So what this does is it takes an employer who before COVID may have had good experience in terms of not having a lot of layoffs, maybe having none, but because of COVID, they suddenly had a huge number of layoffs. So they would have gone from, say, rate class 0 or rate class 1. And now, because of that experience rating, they would be jumping up to a very high rate class. And so they are essentially, because their business happened to be adversely impacted by COVID, they're going to take a large hit, whereas other businesses that may not have been adversely impacted by COVID would artificially see themselves maybe drop down a class or something like that.
So,
Even if they've had a bad experience rating in the past because of other layoffs. And so now we're just socializing that.
right. And that's relief from 0 through 20 on that experience scale.
Mhm.
And there's an additional proposal coming for relief on the 1 through 5 Roman numeral schedule.
Yeah. So this piece here keeps people from jumping up from rate class 0 or whatever to a very high rate class, or to a higher rate class than they would have had without COVID. The other rate relief, rather than experience rating relief, is temporarily holding down tax rates. And that's where we get into, how much is this costing the trust fund? The experience rating relief shouldn't cost the trust fund really anything, because people are you're still going to have to bring in the same amount roughly. There'll be some difference, but what it's doing is it's just socializing those costs instead of
I think the easiest way
laying
to
the burden.
to
Go
answer
ahead.
your question is this experience rating relief is individual to the individual business, whereas the freeze and the taxable wage base is across the entire system. Everybody benefits or is affected. This is targeted, this experience
Individual.
rating is targeted at the individual business who may have experienced significant layoffs during COVID.
Right.
Put it another way, does effectively mean that what's happening here is those businesses that have high amounts of layoffs or high rates of layoffs are going to continue to pay the most in terms of their experience rating, whereas those that have people who have left because of these narrow categories are not being penalized commensurately. Is that a fair way of putting it?
I actually not, because both groups are not going to have experience rating. It's whether it's a layoff or a voluntary quit, as long as it's COVID related, we're not going to affect.
You're not going to do either. So you're not going to do either for the layoff that is COVID related. That's what I wanted to clarify.
Right. Yes. Right. We're trying to all COVID related thing. That's what we passed last year.
Yeah.
The only thing we're dealing with now is there's going to be an added requirement lifted off of business for 2020 and a new requirement imposed upon business for 2021, which I think, to play my hand, I think is a fair trade-off. So we're repealing something from last year that was difficult administratively and would affect the individual businesses' charge relief. And we're actually, for the voluntary quit, we're imposing it in 2021 where it can be administered in a good cause fashion. So
Okay.
we'll get back to the bill now, and it'll be another rerun of the same explanation.
Yeah, so that is, I think we've covered the key points on the
Well, isn't there a section that talks about guidelines where the commissioner has control over this?
That's what I was going to get to next.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So
My apologies.
yeah, so the commissioner has discretion to determine what good cause for failing to rehire or offer to rehire might be. And then the commissioner is directed here to adopt procedures in an application form for employers to apply for relief by June 1, 2021. Given the committee's discussion, this is earlier language. You may want to say procedures, guidelines, and an application form, just to be clear that, or procedures, guidance, and an application form, so that the commissioner can kind of explain what they see as good, what the department's going to treat as good cause. And then C just exempts the commissioner from the possibility of rulemaking, because there's a provision in our Administrative Procedure Act that could allow someone to force the department to turn the procedures into rules, which could delay this for 4 months to a year, depending on how the rulemaking process went. So we're exempting them from that requirement. And then D requires the commissioner to begin to first report back to this committee and its counterpart in the House, summarizing the procedures and application form that it's going to be adopted, that is going to be adopted, and also to commence a public outreach campaign by April 15th for both of those. So this is basically starting to notify people that this is what you're going to have to do in 2021 to get relief. We're going to open up applications on June 1st, and all of this will go live then, but this is what we're setting out. So that allows the legislature to kind of get an update on this before it adjourns.
Is this the section? I know Senator Clarkson correctly, said this, a lot of this is about education, which I agree with. I mean, we want I think the employers are going to do the right thing, and employees who may not know that they have an opportunity to go back to the old job. Is this where the education piece comes in, that, there'll be better communication between employers and employees to say, hey, the law requires you to offer me something unless you have a good reason not to. I'm calling HR right now and said, what's the status here? So put people in contact. Because I think one of the reasonable good cause requirements might be that the employee has to keep the employer abreast of what their employable status is if they want to get this offer. So,
Well, and vice versa. I mean,
Right.
the employer needs to let the employee know that they're rehiring again,
Right.
and would they like their job back?
Right.
Right.
It goes both ways. And I don't
it-
want to have the commissioner saddled with a lot of good cause requests saying, I didn't know about this.
Right. So,
So, that's just a
does this
waste.
cover that, Damon? Does this section here cover, or do we need more language for that?
So this section covers that in very broad strokes. We have discussed, but not really established language around whether we want to say, employees shall be required to notify the employer when they're available for work again, or something like that.
No, you're missing my point. The good cause guidelines and stuff, I think, is going to come back to us from the department. I'm just saying, do we need to have a sentence in here about that there should be embarking, or is it in here, embarking on an education campaign about the ability to get your job back? Not necessarily the specifics of how you do it, but when a notice goes out to employers for their monthly or quarterly filing, would there be something in there? When on a benefit re-upping, is there going to be like a notice saying this is part of our law, something like that?
Yeah, so it says commence a public outreach campaign to notify employers and employees of the requirements and procedures to obtain relief from
Okay, I don't
charges under
have
this
that.
section.
I don't have that in front of me. That's my problem.
Oh,
Are
I'm
you on
sorry.
that?
It's
That's what I-
shared on the screen, and it's
Yeah,
on page. It's on page 7, the very, very top of page 7 of the draft of possible amendments that I just sent to you.
Right. I have the bill in front of me. I don't see it. I'm frozen. I guess you have control over. Oh no, I have control over the screen. Okay, got it. Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So let's try and bring some closure to this if people are ready. The way I view this is that we are repealing a provision of the law right now that would result in more people, and we have this issue with a lot of, the high percentage of women unemployed, of people possibly getting their job back, which I don't do lightly, for 2020, but I understand the administrative problems. But I think it's a fair change and a common sense change to where we can make this matching even better going forward, that we should do that. We also have the choice of doing nothing. We can say to the department, you have a law that you have to follow right now for 2020. Go do it. And we won't expand the law in 2021. So I think we have those two choices in front of us. We also have the choice of, I guess the other choices would be to repeal the existing law and don't do anything to improve that matching, or we can leave the existing law in place and expand the existing law going forward. So there's 4 different ways we can go. And I guess my feeling is that we do what's in this proposal here, and repeal 2020 and go forward and apply it to all the separations in 2021, which when does I always get confused as to when this experience rating looks back on and when it's done. It's done like in the spring, right? That's so what we're talking about in terms of coming up with people's experience rating won't be until next spring. But as we go forward, there will be a record kept on whether there was needed to be a reoffer hire, and whether it was done or whether there was a good cause exception. So I'm getting parched from talking, so I'll let some other people talk if they want to. Okay, I would like a straw vote on whether what's in front of you is the direction you want to go. You can think about it some more and change your vote, but I'd like to move beyond the sunset bill at this point.
Right. I would agree. I support I support this repeal and these additions to unemployment insurance at the moment, and the voluntary quits and the rehires. I think this is, only a fool doesn't change their mind, and it's evolved. And these are, I think, good additions for us going forward. I mean, I think we have additional thinking as we have worked on this, and as we see the light at the end of the tunnel, and as we're even thinking about, businesses beefing back up and being able to rehire people. It's, I think in many cases, we have the challenge of people have already moved on and taken advantage of educational opportunities. And I have a number of businesses in Windsor County that are letting me know that they've offered to rehire, and people have declined because they've already taken other jobs. They've gotten better educated. They've gotten, they've done a whole bunch of things that have changed their lives and changed their circumstances. So I think this is a good provision. I think these are good provisions, and I support this work.
Damien, I just asked one other thing because I want to be clear. In the existing law, when it says that an employer has to offer to rehire for those people laid off, is there a good cause exception presently to that?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
I believe there is. I'm just looking at the language now. There is not. So it says, An employer shall only be eligible for relief from charges under the provisions of this subdivision if the employer rehires or offers to rehire within a reasonable period of time after it resumes operations at the individual's place of employment as determined by the commissioner or upon completion of the individual's period of isolation or quarantine. So the commissioner has discretion to determine what a reasonable period of time for that offer of rehire is, but there's no good cause reason not to
Right.
And so
rehire.
in this particular proposal, even as it applies to layoffs, we're allowing for a good cause exception, correct?
Right.
Yeah, and part of that discussion was just around how when we passed this language last spring, we were expecting sort of a V-shaped recession with a quick bounce back and, you know, maybe a one peak
Right.
pandemic. And obviously circumstances are much different and the recession we're experiencing is much different than what we were initially expecting. So the discussion last spring was around how, you know, employers are going to shut down for 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, and then they'll just need to send out an offer to the workforce they laid off and say, come on back or reopen. And that's probably far too flip a way to put it, but that was essentially the idea, is that
Yeah.
they could say we're reopened for business. But what we've seen is a much more significant impact on employers where they've had to downsize, they've closed locations. And as the Economic Development Committee, you're all too familiar with the struggles that the employers are facing. And like Senator Clarkson has mentioned, we've also seen employees take the opportunity to upskill or to reassess what they want to do for a career and change career paths. So there have been a lot of changes given the length of the pandemic.
And we have offered some of those. Those have been part of our work. You know, the CCV classes that 1,000 people took advantage of. You know, those are,
Okay.
we've offered some of those opportunities. So it's a,
What I'd like to do is to, unless people have other comments, I'd like to just take a straw vote on these sections and save about 10 or 15 minutes to set the stage for the bigger issues for tomorrow. So can I don't see Senator Ballin if you're on the phone or not, but I would just do a show of hands of people who support this direction. And if you don't support it, could you tell me what direction you'd like to go? Because there's like 4 choices here. So,
I'll tell Becca we're voting.
okay, I see Senator Rahm is a yes. Senator Clarkson is a yes. I don't see Senator Brock is a yes. Senator Ballant. Okay.
Hold on. I'm just letting her know that
Well, she
she'll-
comes back. You can let her
she'll
know.
be with us.
Okay. Oh, Senator, okay, yeah. Senator Ballin has to go to natural resources, but that's after we adjourn. Okay.
Well, I've told her we're doing a straw poll on S10. So if we can keep it open. So we're at the
Not quite on
moment.
S10, it's like 5% of S10, but yes. Okay. Thank you. We'll get her vote. Well, it's just a straw vote anyhow. Okay. So
So
let's
the straw vote was 4-0 at the moment.
401 at this point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the draft you have in front of it is incorporated some potential amendments. I'm not even sure I fully recall what we did on the benefit side in this draft, but right now, if based on that straw poll, all we have is an extension of the sunset with a tweak on the offer to rehire affecting experience rating. We don't have a bill at all that includes the administration's proposals on what I call rate relief freezing the wage base, freezing the 1 through 5, or slowing that down. We have no legislation on that, but clearly we've been talking about it a lot. And I would like to do something in that area for sure. I mean, this is an expected tax hike in some ways for our businesses that is unusual. So the administration, as you recall, last year, and the House passed this, came in, let's lump all these things together in unemployment rate relief. And they came in and they said, it's too big of a jump to go from the Schedule 1 percentages, which are the lowest percentages, to the Schedule 5 percentages, which is the highest. And that's where we're headed if we don't do something before that change that comes this July 1st. Our committee asked the question, I think it was a right question, this thing is so GD fluid. We don't know what's going on with this pandemic. When do you really need to know by? Do we want to make a decision on this last September? And our decision, contrary to the House, was not to do anything last year and wait until we came back. And now the clock is ticking, but we still have time to make a decision on rate relief. In the interim, don't hold me to this math, but I think the amount of rate relief that's being sought by the administration has tripled from what they had passed last year. Last year, they said the bill that passed the House said you couldn't go down or up more than 2 categories. So in this coming this spring, when they set the rate category of 1 through 5, starting next year for July 1, 2021 to June 30th, 2022, their proposal was to only go to Schedule 3, not to go to Schedule 5. So that saved two brackets there. And that, we were told, was about a $36 million savings in contributions by employers. Now their proposal is multifaceted. They want to not just limit it to 2 things, they want to freeze it at Category 1 as opposed to Category 5 where it would go. Last year they were saying we only want to go to Category 3. Now they're saying they want to keep it at Category 1 for next year. And in the following year, they want to limit the amount it can go only to Category 3. So now you have a bigger tax savings this year, and you have another tax savings in the following year. The third prong is they're now calling for a freeze on the taxable wage base, which I think is now 14.1 or thereabouts, and is scheduled to go starting July 1st to, I guess, 16,000. I don't know if it's next year or the following. I can't remember, but it's going to go up by about $2,000. They want to keep that for 1 year at 14.1. So there's three changes that lower the impact of unemployment contributions on our employer community. I remember our committee last year, or I said last year, and our committee, I think, in some ways agreed that, well, maybe I shouldn't speak for others, but I said to the commissioner, I said, if we're going to do this for employers, I want to see something done for employees as well. I said that last September. I've been saying it ever since. I have my scars from the grand bargain in 2010, and that whole change in our structure, the primary focus in 2009 and the Great Recession of 2010, the trouble the trust fund was in, everybody agreed, was because we had no increase in the taxable wage base built into our formula. So it had been at $7,000 or $8,000 forever. And to their credit, the department came in and said, we need to have an escalator on this taxable wage base, and we need to jump it up. But at the same time, the request was made of workers saying, you have to share in this pain as well. And there were a bunch of benefit hits in 2010. So it made me think, now that we're doing an adjustment here, we have people who are struggling, who are out of work. And even though we're getting help from the federal government and extensions, their lives are not easy. And what we've learned in this process is that we overreached in 2009 and 10, in my opinion, because now I see figures like $1 billion in the trust fund, when a healthy trust fund was looked at as like $250,000. So there's room here for us to help businesses and help workers at the same time as we do this minor adjustment. In my mind, I think we need to do a major overhaul of all of this, but it's going to take time and a few years. But if we're doing a temporary fix, let's have a win-win for both workers and for employers. So, and I think we can afford to do that. And that's why we have some of the work that Matt has done on the benefit side. We're getting to we're at the 11:30 hour. On the benefit side, the two discussions we've had is potentially a 20% or a flat amount of increase in benefits for 1 year for workers, be that at those workers who are capped out at the maximum, which is $513 or $31, or for people below, or for both, to give them a 20% increase. And we've also talked about establishing a dependent benefit allowance, which I think 13 states have. I think it can be based on an individual household. If you have kids, you get one flat rate, or it could be per kid, to help people in that category, which would be a nice fit with the things we heard from Joyce Manchester about the 73%. I realize we're coming out of the recession, so it may not be as relevant, but not out of the recession, out of the pandemic. But who knows? We thought we were coming out of the pandemic last spring as well. So anyhow, those are two of the ideas. I've asked Matt through Damien for some more specific dollar figures on the benefits side, which we hopefully will have by tomorrow to look at. But we're at our adjournment time. But I think that's a good summary for people to think about. And we can pick this up tomorrow, but let's take a few minutes to discuss that if we want. And but I believe we have this scheduled for tomorrow. Is that right, Nathan?
Yes, I
Okay.
think we're set for tomorrow.
Okay.
But
Well-
I would remind everybody in preparation for discussion tomorrow to look at Matt's current chart that he has up under his name, under Matt as a witness. The chart is there in his memo to us from February 23rd. And I just need to be reminded when the tax, because I know it's a different time of the year, when the tax rates kick in for employers. And I believe, is it April or July?
July 1 is when the new
July 1.
tax rate kicks in.
So when we're proposing for 2021, Damien, to keep the tax rate schedule at 1, that would be from July 21 through July 22. Is that right?
Yeah, so the way the wording is that it's for the tax year beginning on July 1, 2021.
Okay, so for 2021 through July 2022, it would be 1, the taxable wage base would be 14.1. And then the administration proposes we keep it at 14.1,
for calendar year
14,100 for the,
2022.
yeah. And then it would go up to, the administration's proposing that when we take it up to in 2022 to 2023, it would go to tax schedule 3, and the wage base would stay at 14,100. So we'd have 1 year of it, of the schedule's frozen, and then it would bump up, but the wage base would stay frozen. And then
Wait.
the following year, it would go up to 5, and the taxable wage base would only go up $500. So it's also kept at a slower rate of increase.
No, the wage base, it's important to note, the wage base has an inflator attached to it. The $2,000 change, which was mentioned this morning, is actually periodically when you drop down to Schedule 3 and then drop to Schedule 1 after the trust fund is healthy again, there's a $2,000 reduction in the wage base. But otherwise, the wage base keeps going up each year based on an inflator. So that's what you're seeing reflected in Matt's chart. And the other important thing just to keep in mind is, so the tax rates are set in April and then apply from July 1. The wage base updates every year on January 1. So it's this, exactly. So you've got this staggered scenario here where wage base updates on January 1. The bulk of payments come in the first quarter following the wage base update. The tax rate changes on July 1. So half of each calendar year you're potentially paying at a new tax rate. And then half of each fiscal year, the wage base has changed. So it's confusing, like so many other things with unemployment insurance, that it's in the details there.
Right, but for this pandemic year of 2020 through 2021, the taxable wage base has been at the highest. It's been at 16.
It dropped to 14.1 on this past January 1.
Okay, it did, because it's not
Yep.
reflected in this chart.
I think it is.
It is reflected for 2021, but that's assuming, I thought that it was 21 through July, through end of June 22. So I guess
Right. That's the confusing thing. Is it calendar year or fiscal year? And so the wage base is on a calendar year cycle. The tax rate is on a fiscal year cycle.
So January 1, 21, it went down to 14.1. Got it.
That's correct. Yep.
Got it.
Senator
Okay,
Robb,
great.
this will be the last question. Thank you.
It's a kind of a question, kind of a precursor in case Cameron and others from DOL are listening. So I just want to say, I sent an article around that I think is pretty haunting. Janet Yellen saying that unless we do something to really support women in the workforce, this will have a scarring effect on their participation and presence, acknowledging that the Great Recession caused a decade-long cutback in women being able to participate fully in the workforce. And this has been a far greater impact on women in this she session, as they're terming it, as well as in Vermont. It has been a really drastic impact on women. I know that when we talk about overall benefit increases and the increase for people with dependents, we're looking further out. And I know that, Cameron can attest, I spoke with him last week, just really wondering what it would take to get this mainframe in the kind of shape it needs to be in to accommodate a more equitable system that is in some ways going to be more complex. We got a response from the commissioner that it could take 2 or more years. I'm really curious about the monies we might be expending. And if we need to talk to digital services, I understand, but the monies we may be expending this year to try and improve the mainframe, even if it's not an overhaul of the system. And I know I just don't want to just hear tomorrow, these changes just will take 2 or more years. If there's any other discussion we can have tomorrow that feels more productive about what kind of changes we're actually talking about to stabilize the mainframe, to be able to make these kinds of changes possible for Vermonters sooner.
Now I hear you. I think, we shouldn't necessarily let policy, hopefully good policy, be dictated by, automation and mainframes and things like that. It may cost us more money to fix it sooner than later, but if we have some good ideas, I think where there's a will, there's a way. So let's talk some more about that tomorrow. And I appreciate everybody's time, and